thinking maybe we should get started now. So I wanted to say good evening to everybody. Welcome, and thank you all for coming. I'm Roxanne Ayotte, Chief of Temagami First Nation, and I'm honored to host this evening's event on behalf of the Chief and Council of Temagami First Nation. First of all, I'd like to welcome all Temagami First Nation members, and people from Bear Island who have traveled, thank you for coming. And anyone else who has traveled, I'm sure there are other people traveling from other distances. I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional territory of Nipissing First Nation. Is there anyone here for Nipissing First Nation? Sheridan? There was, yeah. Well, thank you for coming, and thank you for having us on your territory. I'd also like to welcome elders and youth, and a special acknowledgement to Mayor John Hodgins. Mayor John, thank you, John, for coming. In the spirit of cooperating with Temagami First Nation, thank you for accepting our invitation. One thing that I'd like to ask is, if you have cell phones, if you could please turn them off, just so when Cindy is speaking, it's not like, you know, ringing going on. So, as you are aware, we have a very special speaker this evening. But before we bring Cindy on stage, I'd like to talk to you about, or introduce to you, another very special young lady. Her name is Kendall, and I truly admire Kendall. Her spirit for trying something new, I think is a real gift that she has, and she's a true ambassador. I'm very proud of how well she represents Temagami First Nation. So I'd like to ask Kendall to come up and share some of her experiences with you, and also introduce our guest this evening. So can I have a warm welcome for Kendall?
Temagami First Nation, which is on Bear Island Lake, Temagami, Ontario, which, as most of you may know, is up north. I'm 17 years old, and right now I'm studying to become an environmental technician at Stanford Fleming College in Windsor, Ontario. So, sorry, I'm nervous. You guys might be wondering why I'm up here. Well, I'm up here because I decided to take some initiative and stop waiting for happiness and a lucky life to fall in my lap, and I just started to take opportunities for myself. So I grew up on Bear Island, which is a small island, and out there we're out in the wilderness, and out there I learned how to set a net before I learned how to do advanced algebra or anything. So when I moved to the city to come to high school, it was a very difficult transaction. I didn't really know anyone. I didn't know how to socialize very well with all these people. So I had to learn how to do it. And it was hard, and I had problems. And I didn't know how to get into the right group of people. And unfortunately, I chose the wrong group of people in grade 9. And I got into bad things. So bad things led to more bad things, which led to me eventually having to move back home. And when I was back home, I had to travel from Temagami to a school, which is really hard when you're young because catching a 6 a.m. bus is difficult, and you're always tired. So I decided that I wanted to do something with my life, but I didn't know what to do, and I was really depressed a lot. So my reserve started this thing called the Induction on Our Future, Our Generation 2010 to 2030 project, and that's where the youth went out onto the traditional lands of Temagami First Nation, and we learned about our land and our history, and then we came back. And when we came back, we interviewed people from Bear Island and found out what they wanted to be in our future. And from that, we made a presentation. And they chose 2 youth to present this to the community, and luckily I was one of them. So after going through a hard time and coming through high school, it was a big confidence boost. And I decided that I really liked it because I was too shy to speak because I was afraid no one would listen. But then when I was up there and people listened, it made me feel good, and I realized that I wanted to spend my life talking or trying to talk. And so after that, I began to become more involved in things. At my school, I went to St. Joseph Scholar Hall here, and they offered me a position on the green team, since I was involved in environmental things, and I liked environmental things. But I was kind of skeptical, and I was like, okay, maybe, I'm not really a leader. So the teacher asked me if I could just go to one environmental symposium hosted at the Clarion Resort and decide if I really wanted to go. While I was there was a presenter, and they presented about a project called Students on Ice. And Students on Ice is a company that brings 70 international youth to the Arctic and to Antarctica to study global warming firsthand. I thought that was really cool. But when they said only 70 people got to go, I was like, oh goodness, no, I can't go. And it was $10,000. But the worst thing they could say to me was no. So, right after Christmas, I begged my mom for $250 so I could apply to go to the Arctic. I sent in my application, and I waited, I mean, like, it was torturing. Like, I sat every day waiting on my email, hoping to get an email. And eventually, I got an email back a month later, and it said, congratulations, I was going. So there, I had such a big boost of happiness because I was picked out of 70 international students. And when you're recognized as somebody in the world that can go, it was just amazing, and it really helped. So I kind of decided that maybe I should become involved with other things. If these people like me, maybe other people will like me. And the same week, I think 2 days later, I was asked to become a youth worker on the community foundations for Temagami. And from there, they brought me to Vancouver, where I was able to interact with other youth from around Canada. And they had a position for 3 youth to go up in front of all these people and talk about what we did at the workshop. And there was 1,000 people going to be there, and some of the people included Naomi Tutu and the Governor General of Canada, and I was like, I can't do that, but I'm going to do it anyways. So I went up there, and I presented, and I was very nervous. So to ease it, I decided I was going to say a joke. And usually that'd be a bad thing, because I'm really bad at jokes. But everyone really liked it. So then I was like, hey, maybe I can start being funny and stop being the monotone person in my speech. So I started to just try being funny. Yet I could try. And then I came home and I learned a lot from that. I learned about financial assets, and I learned that I didn't want to just be involved with youth things. I wanted to be involved with things that included adults. Things that were big problems in the world. But I didn't know what it was. So I went to the Arctic, I learned a lot about myself, I learned a lot about who I wanted to be, and I came back. I presented to numerous people, and it was fun. So my family began getting emails from other people and forwarding them to me. And my cousin Lydia forwarded me this email about the United Nations. And there was an opportunity for youth to go to the United Nations with Cindy Blackstock, who is here tonight, and speak about inequalities in child welfare, healthcare, and education on reserves. And it had to be about your first-hand experiences. So yet again, I was like, I can't do this. But I applied anyways on the last day. So a month later, I just turned 17, and I just come back from Niagara Falls from the Ontario Youth Leadership Council meeting, and I got an email saying that I was made it to the second round. And I was ecstatic. But then again, I thought, okay, well, I made it to the next round, but it's not going anywhere else from here, but I tried. And I remember I was at a fundraiser at the school on Bear Island, and I was talking to my Aunt Lucille, and I was like, I don't think I'm going to get in. And she said, that was fine, I tried. And I was like, okay. So I think it was about 2 days later, I went home, and I was sick with a cold. Right before Christmas, awful cold. And and I got a phone call, and this lady called, and I thought it was someone from my school calling because I wasn't at school. So here I was apologizing to this lady over not being in my class. And she's like, no, Kendall, I'm not from your school. And she said, we'd like to congratulate you because you're going to the United Nations. And I just lost it. I had to call I called my aunt at work. She was the first person I called. I called her, and she's here. She's right there. And, so we went to the UN, and going to the UN is such a different experience. We got to stand there and talk about our lives, talk about things that had happened to us and people actually cared. And it was nice knowing that people were listening about things. Like, I'm not saying that growing up in Temagami was bad, but there were kids around the world in Canada who didn't have it as amazing as we did. So it was really nice to have an opinion and have people listening to our opinions. So now Cindy Blackstock's here, and I'd really like to thank her because she made a huge impact in my life, and she has allowed me to join many other groups. Because of her, I applied to other groups. I worked with Jane Goodall, and I'm now the Aboriginal Outreach Leader for Canada. And so I would just like to thank Cindy and thank everyone who came here to listen to Cindy because she's an amazing person. And to introduce Cindy, I have a small biography. So Cindy is a member of the, I don't know how to pronounce Gitxsan Nation, and she has worked in the field of child and family services for over 20 years. She has over 50 publications, and her key interests include exploring and addressing the causes and disadvantages of Aboriginal children and families by promoting equitable and culturally based interventions. Her current professional interests include holding fellowships with the Atkinson's Foundation, the Ashoka Foundation, and the J.W. McConnell Family Foundation. So, here's Cindy.
So what a great honor to be on these traditional lands and to be invited by the Temagami First Nation, the home of Kendall White, I thought to myself as I flew into this land. And I know that those are words that will echo in my mind for a long time because I really wish sometimes there is reincarnation so I could come back and be as good and great and strong and wise as the young people that I find myself in a company to, including Kendall White. So please join me in another round of applause for Kendall. We do live in one of the greatest countries in the world, one of the wealthiest countries in the world, one where we often find ourselves on hockey season, although not this year, singing the national anthem. And for those of us who have other nations, we sing about values that often echo those that are in the Canadian national anthem. The idea of truth, of honor, of respect, of justice, of love, and of wisdom. And we sing that line in the national anthem. It says, "O Canada, we stand on guard for thee." And some of us show up on November 11th and we pay homage to the veterans who fought for those values in the Second and First World War and in Korea. And in the many other conflicts that have happened around the world, but there is something important. Many of us are not taught how to stand on guard for those values in time of peace. How do we actually ensure that values of equality and justice and fairness are lived out in everyday lives, and particularly the lives of children? Well, I've come to understand that it is not politicians who know how to do this. That if you really want to know what justice and fairness looks like, and what a just and better country and humanity looks like, you need to go to grade 3 classes. Because they are the keepers of, children are experts in love and fairness, and they are the keepers of hope. They are the keepers of the possible. They are the dreamers that our ancestors breathed life into. They expect us to be as good and great as they know we can be. And it is through their example that reconciliation can truly be made real in Canada. Next slide, please. As many of you know, and Kendall knew firsthand and told the United Nations along with other young people, First Nations children in Canada get far fewer government services than all other children. And often those services, even when they're provided, are not relevant to them, not in ways that share the strength of their peoples, their languages, their spiritual traditions. And this has been going on for years. I was reading a report recently, and it said, can anyone hazard a guess as to what year or what century real progress will be made towards the equality of First Nations children? That report was written right here in Ontario in 1967. I was 3 years old. Governments after governments, no matter what political party, they come to power, they say we'll give another couple dollars, but it falls far short of what other children receive. Now, what does this look like at the grassroots level? What does it mean for a generation of children, and what does it mean for the country? Next slide. Well, this is one of my great heroes. Along with Kendall is Shannon Kustachin from the Attawapiskat First Nation. Many of you know of her story. She is the daughter of Andrew Kustachin and Jenny Nakagi. She has loving brothers and sisters, and her first language is Cree, and her second language is English. As a 5-year-old child, she was just as excited as all other children are to go to her first day of school, except in her community, that school was contaminated by 30,000 gallons of diesel fuel that had seeped under the school. So the government of Canada brought up portable trailers and put them on the playground of the contaminated school, and they said to the children that that was just temporary. So this beautiful little girl at the age of 5 went to a portable trailer that was no further from me to the back wall from the contaminated site. Well, by grade 3, she was hoping for a new school. Her sister was advocating for it, but they were still in those portables. And by grade 5, she saw children losing hope and dropping out of school. You see, because it was so cold in the portables that you'd often have to wear your winter coats. Black mold had started to infest the walls, and you had to guard your snacks so that the rats wouldn't eat them. When she got to grade 8, she had never stood in a hallway of a school, never having stood in a hallway of a school. And she thought that the country has got to be better than this. CBC came up and did a documentary, and they called it The Forgotten Children of Attawapiskat, wondering why these children were being left behind, their hopes, their dreams were being left behind in a country as wealthy as ours. Well, Shannon decided that she would continue the legacy of her older sister and many of the other children in the Attawapiskat, and asked the children in her school to write letters to the government. She thought, they must not know how bad it is for those of us up here trying to learn. And if they did, they would do something about it. And sure enough, the children sent their letters. But the government sent one back. They said, no school for you, we cannot afford it. We cannot afford it. We are running billions of dollars in surplus budget. So what does she do? Well, she gathers together with the other 13-year-olds. You see, they had raised money all year for a graduation. But Chris, a young man from that community, he says, you know what, I don't think we should have our graduation ceremony, the trip that we all have dreamed of. I think there's something more important that we need to do. And that is to send 3 young people down to meet with the Minister of Indian Affairs and ask for a school. And one of them was Shannon Kustachin. So Shannon, in 2008, finds herself in front of the Minister of Aboriginal Affairs office, and she says in the Globe and Mail quote of the week, I think he's nervous. Because the first thing he says is, look how big my office is. And she said, yeah, it is pretty nice here, and I wish it was this warm for those of us trying to learn up in Attawapiskat. And then ministers do, you've seen it before, they start looking at their watch. Because you're supposed to kind of almost feel grateful for every second you get with them. So Shannon knew that she could not waste a moment. She had to get right in there with the question. So she said, Minister, are you going to give us a school or not? And he said, no, we can't afford it. She stood up, she extended her hand, and she said, thank you for meeting with us today, but I don't believe you. And I will never give up, because school's a time for dreams, and every kid deserves this. This is her 2 hours after that meeting with the minister. She is in front of Parliament speaking, and she is reaffirming the promise that she made to the minister that she will never give up, because by this time she understood that it wasn't just her crummy school in Attawapiskat. There were kids in Manitoba going to a school infested with snakes, kids in BC going to schools infested with black mold, kids in Alberta that had no water for their schools. She also understood even in First Nations communities where there are good schools, they get less money for teachers, less money, no money for libraries, no money for computers, all these basic things that you need to learn. So she pledged to continue until every child got the education they deserved. And she was true to her word, and because of her efforts, she would go out and speak to anyone who would listen. She was nominated for the International Children's Peace Prize, one of only 45 kids in the world to be nominated for that prize, given out by the Nobel laureates. All the way from Attawapiskat, came out a hero to the world. But sadly, on June the 1st, 2010, we lost Shannon in a car accident. Hundreds of miles away from her family, trying to get the education that she had a right to get in her own community. And within 24 hours of her passing, the children from Attawapiskat joined with the thousands of children that she had inspired in a letter writing campaign to create something called Shannon's Dream. And that dream is to continue her work to make sure every child in this country gets a safe and comfy school and equitable education. Now you might be wondering to yourselves, what are these children in this moment of loss? Would they actually have the time and energy to be able to continue this fight? Well, let's check in and see what they're doing. These are the kids the next April. These are not First Nations children. And I'd like to just point out that the guy in the orange t-shirt, even though they're on Parliament Hill, is not a member of the NDP party. At least not that we know of. Neither is the kid in the blue coat a conservative, or the red backpack a liberal. Kids don't care much about political parties, only adults do. Kids care about values. And when they heard Shannon's message, they thought for sure what they're going to do is something. They're actually going to get a radio flyer wagon. You've seen them. They're old red tin ones. And they're going to build a school. And you can see, there it is, right there. And I asked the girls who built the school, I said, why did you build the school? And they said, well, we needed a mailbox to put our letters in. But the second thing is, they'd read a Canadian Geographic article, and they found out that in a time Shannon and her friends were waiting for a school, the Canadian government had built 75 schools in Afghanistan. Something a wealthy country like ours should do, but it makes you wonder why these children were being left behind. So the girl said, maybe they think it's too hard, so we thought we would show them, you can actually do this in an afternoon. And they pointed out to me that, look, it's made out of bricks, nothing flimsy there, you know, this is a good sturdy school, it's not going to fall apart. So there they are, they're up on Parliament Hill, and I've come to understand that politicians are probably most afraid of a child with a microphone, especially on Parliament Hill. So up come the kids. Now, what are they going to possibly say? How can they understand? You know, we've all heard the phrase, Aboriginal issues are complex. You know, it's like something that none of us can understand. They even hire people to relate to us, right? Well, up comes Harry. He's 9 years old. And he says, "Dear Prime Minister Harper, do you have a cat?" So at this point, I'm thinking the Prime Minister thinks he's off the hook, right? He says, "I have a cat, and his name is Micah, and he's a boy, and he's black." And then he gets right down to business. He said, "Stephen Harper, listen to me. If you do not build more schools, you're going to create a crime wave and lose all of your money. Because kids who cannot go to school cannot get jobs. And they're still going to need money, so some of them are going to have to steal it. And then people in the community are going to get mad because crooks are invading their homes. So you better man up right now and build more schools, because you're in charge, you're going to have to fix this mess. Love, Harry." And then a little girl steps up and she says, "You know, I go to a nice school and I get to turn on the tap and there's clean water, and I get to go to the doctor when I'm not feeling well. Is the only reason I get to do these things because I'm a non-Aboriginal girl? Is that the only reason?" You see, kids by the hundreds understood something very simple, that it's not okay for a child to be given less because of who they are. It's not okay. It doesn't make it a better Canada. It doesn't make us better people. It, in fact, takes everything away from us for what we say we stand for at all. Next slide. Now, what about children in foster care? These inequalities that Shannon talked about echo across all programs for children and young people on reserves. And many people are talking about the residential schools here in Canada and the apology the Prime Minister made in 2008, but what many people do not know is there are 3 times the number of First Nations children in foster care today than there was at the height of residential schools. Not because of abuse, and that's important to understand. So if you just take abuse cases, there's no overrepresentation. They're driven into child welfare care out of poverty, poor housing, and substance misuse related to residential schools. All things we could do something about. Unfortunately, it is something that is underfunded so that agencies and First Nations don't have a chance to address these issues. And if you don't believe me, believe your own government. This is their own internal document describing their funding of First Nations child welfare agencies. And you can see there that they're talking about kids and they're saying circumstances are dire. These are little kids we're talking about here. Now you think if things are dire, that the government would then be saying, let's mobilize whatever we need to do to get out there and help the kids. But as you can see, they're mobilizing their lawyers because they're worried about getting sued. We had worked with the government for over 10 years on 2 joint solutions. I don't believe in criticizing Canada unless they have a documented inequality. We know what the harms are for kids, and we have the solution to address it. But when they don't implement it after all those things are there, it makes you wonder what's happening. Now keep in mind that the amount of money needed to address this inequality was only 0.5% of the surplus budget. They could have, at that time, spent 99.5% on all kinds of fighter jets or other pagodas they wanted to buy, and still done the right thing for kids, but they did not do it. So it's not a matter of money. It's not a matter of money. Next slide. And the government has said recently, and the governments often do this, they'll say, if you were to talk to them about child welfare, they say, well, the amount of money we're providing to First Nations child welfare has gone up. We've doubled it in the last 2 years. In fact, Kendall talked to you about the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child, and they were just on a webcast, and the Canadian delegation said, oh, you don't need to worry about what those youth said to you in child welfare. They didn't say those particular words, but that was the gist of it. Because we are funding it at twice the level than we were before. What they didn't say is that the increases in spending are due to the numbers of kids going unnecessarily into child welfare care, which is that red bar there. They called attention to the committee about something called enhanced funding, which is better than the old funding formula, but the Auditor General ruled that to be inequitable over 4 years ago, and they haven't fixed the problem. So if you're a First Nations parent on reserve, your choices in child and family services are getting dire and inequitable policy from the feds, the old formula, or flawed and inequitable policies from the new group. Which one would you feel that your child deserves? Many parents, rightfully so, say neither of those options fit, that our kids deserve culturally based and equitable services. So, and many Canadians agree. So this is a poll of Canadians asking them if they believe that First Nations kids should have the same quality of services. And you can see over 97% believe firmly that they do. Now we have the 2% over there that the government is actually taking their position on. Next slide. Because what we did in 2007 as an organization of 4 people is we decided that we would have to take the government to court. So in February 27, 2007, we filed a human rights complaint against the government of Canada alleging they're racially discriminating against First Nations children and young people by underfunding children's services. I remember that day very clearly. It was a beautiful day like today, and I walked out of, there was about 20 or 30 supporters of First Nations in the press conference, and I walked outside of Parliament and there was nobody there. We had just filed, in my view, one of the most important human rights cases in the history of this country into silence. But all of that has changed. You see, one of the things I've always believed in is the goodness of Canadians, the goodness of people. And that if you believe in people and if you give them the right information, they'll make up their own mind and they'll do something to help. So we created this I Am a Witness campaign, And we load up all of Canada's court documents, all of our court documents, and we invite people simply to watch. And I'm going to ask you to do the same thing, to sign up on this on our website, fnwitness.ca. And when you sign up, we just want you to watch the case and make up your own mind about what is going on here. Do you think Canada's discriminating, or do you think what they're doing is okay? Well, this case is now watched by over close to 11,000 individuals and organizations. It is the most watched legal case in Canadian history. Now, what is the government doing? Now, I was saying on CTV Power Play at 5 o'clock, and I said, look, if I was a government and someone said to me, you are racially discriminating against kids, let's face it, I mean, that's bad, right? If I was innocent, I would say, let's run to the hearing, cards face up on the table, right? I have nothing to hide. I'm doing the right thing for kids. But what is the Canadian government doing for the last 5 years? They spent $3.1 million of your tax dollars trying to derail this hearing on legal loopholes. And here they are. They're saying even though child welfare laws apply on reserve, they're saying, and it's not fair to compare provincially funded services that all other Canadians get to the services that are funded by the federal government by us in child welfare. Even if the same laws apply, that's not fair. So again, it's an argument about fairness to them. The second argument is, we as the federal government only fund First Nations to deliver child welfare. So I'll just give you half the money that the provinces will give others. But really, at the end of the day, if your members are not happy, you're the one discriminating. And you should be held accountable, not me. That's another argument that has nothing to do with what's best for kids. And I think that that's been the most disappointing thing for me in this entire case, is that as I read every one of Canada's documents, they have not advanced one case, one argument in 5 years that had to do with what's best for children. I would not mind losing if they came up with a better argument about what's best for kids. But I do not want our kids to take a back seat to legal loopholes. So now you might remember those kids. Remember the Shannon's Dream kids? Well, they've been learning a lot in the last few years. So we're going to go to the next slide, and we're going to find them on February 14th in federal court. Now, there you are. Imagine yourself. You're Canada's council. Maybe you're the Prime Minister. Maybe you're a member of Parliament. And you're in the Supreme Court of Canada. Why? Because so many kids want to come and watch you that you can't be accommodated in the federal court. There are over 200 children there, along with people from as far away from Australia. Members of Canadian society from all stripes have come to listen to this argument. Now, your only hope is that the kids in the first row do not understand what you're saying. So I go out during the coffee break. Canada has spent the morning presenting these arguments about comparator issue. How are kids possibly going to understand this legal mumbo-jumbo, I wondered. I was having problems with it. Well, there I find a little boy, and he has a notepad. He's a non-Aboriginal kid. And his teacher told him that being a witness is like being a reporter for the newspaper. You listen to both sides, and then you take notes, and then you tell other people what you felt and what you saw. So he had drawn a line right down the center of his page. And you know the tallies, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? Had a whole list of them on one side and a shorter list on the other side. And he says, do you know what this means? And I thought to myself, no, I don't have a clue. And he said, okay, the long list is when the judge asks Canada a question. And the short list is when they answer. And then I came out, and there was kids there that were kindergarten grade 1. Now, what are they possibly going to know about all this, right? There's a little girl there, and she's munching on her granola bar. I mean, the problem with my group that gets engaged in my issues is they have snack and nap time, right? I have to plan around these things. I don't think any other group really does this, but I do. And there she is, and she says, I have a question. She said, why did they talk about everything except for what's good for kids? When are they going to talk about what's good for kids? She understood it perfectly. She understood that this was an argument where Canada is trying to say, look over here to our unfairness. Don't look at what's happening to the kids. That's not something you want to pay any attention to. So that was inside the courtroom. Now you might be thinking to yourself, if you're Canada, that you would really be looking forward to your lunch break, right? Huh? Let's look at what happened at your lunch break. That's outside the courtroom. This is something called Have a Heart Day for First Nations children, where children of all different groups and adults came together and they wrote valentines to the Prime Minister and their members of Parliament, so that every First Nations child can grow up feeling proud of who they are, safely with their families, go to good schools, and be healthy. Now the Prime Minister, you know, how many of us were kids in elementary school where we had the Valentine's envelope there, where the kids, all of us, right? Well, I can tell you, the Prime Minister got 20,000 pieces of love in his mailbox on this day. Now, what do the kids have to say this round? Well, they were inspired by Kendall and the other young people who went to Geneva. In fact, they wanted to do something special for them. And so they did a book called Children's Voices Have Power. And one of the little girls gets up there. Her name is Bethany, and she's a beautiful blue-eyed, blonde-haired girl. You know, she's got to be about 9 years old. And she stands up and she says, "Dear Prime Minister Harper, I think you should go back to grade 5, because that's where you learn about the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. It says you're supposed to be treating everybody fairly. And if you read this thing, you would know what kids in kindergarten in my school have already figured out, which is that it's not good to be treating kids unfair." And then we have another little boy, his name is Elliot. And of course, he steps up and he says, "Dear Prime Minister Harper, I do not know why you're over in China criticizing their human rights when you're not breaking your own laws back here at home. I think you should get on a plane and come back here, because there's lots of work for you to do." And there were kids singing songs about equality and about justice. And they were saying that they want to grow up in a country where no child is left behind. They don't understand why adults don't get it, but they absolutely believe that the adults are as good and great as they want us to be. That if they write enough letters, that we as people in this country will finally understand that we have to be as good and courageous as they are, and not just talk about reconciliation, but do something about it. Do something about it. You know, I find adults, when I come and talk to them, they get so freaked out when they hear about something with Aboriginal children, and they're producing logic models or committees. Well, I can guarantee you that all the good work being done by these kids has been done with no committees. And I think they have something to teach us, because I don't think I'm the only one in this room who does not like committees very much. They simply get things done. Next slide. And these kids on Have a Heart Day, by the way, just to give you a sense about how much kids can do, there were 600 children in Have a Heart Day outside of Parliament. They spent the next several months recruiting other children through Skype and going out to other elementary schools saying why it's so important that First Nations children be respected and honored in this country. And there were over 1,200 children that joined us on a similar march called Our Dreams Matter Too in Ottawa, and over 6,000 children all over the country. Can you imagine, with those children who are in residential school, who are left alone and sometimes forgotten, how they felt about seeing these children of all different races standing together saying that the world is going to be a better place and we're going to do something about it? Well, some of those survivors were there, and they had tears in their eyes of hope, of real hope, that the pain and anguish that they went through and the strength that they exampled was being lived out in the lives of kids. And the kids were there, and they wanted to hear from one of their heroes, who is one of my heroes too. His name is Wesley Prankert, and he's a non-Aboriginal kid. And some of you in the group might be still thinking, well, she wants me to sign on to Shannon's dream, write a Valentine's to Prime Minister Harper, and she wants me to sign on to this court case. Well, I want you to do all those things. But some of you would still be on the edge thinking, well, I'm not sure I can do any of that. Wesley Prankert was an 11-year-old boy when his father came back from Attawapiskat. Around the dinner table, Wesley heard that there were First Nations people living in tents. There was one potable source of water, that these kids were going to school on this toxic waste dump. So what does Wesley say to himself? He says to his dad, we have to do something. Now, does he know what he can do to help such a huge problem? Remember when the Prime Minister found out? What he did is send a financial manager in there. Well, Wesley thought it might be a little bit more helpful to send up some food. And so he got together with people in his church and he sent up some food. But then he said to himself, that's not enough. I'm going to pitch a tent in the Niagara Falls campground because the people in Attawapiskat are living in tents all the time. And I'm going to go in there and live in a tent and I'm going to ask people to pledge dollars for as long as I'm there. And he invited the radio station to come by. And you know, radio stations are looking for this kind of stuff. Cute kid in a tent raising money for other kids. It's always big stuff. And it was good because Wesley earned over $6,000. And then he gets himself over to the local toy manufacturer. This is the industrial belt of Canada, of course. And he goes up to the CEO. And he says, my name is Wesley Prankard. And I'm raising monies for playgrounds in First Nations communities. Will you match dollar for dollar what I raise? And the CEO, I don't know whether it was a gentleman or a lady, was probably thinking, what's a couple car washes? Sure. Then Wesley wins $25,000 in the Pepsi Refresh Project. And corporate Canada keeps its promise. So in 1 year, Wesley's birthday's in August, and there's a limitation to being a 12-year-old philanthropist because you got school in September to quash all of your activities. And he had raised enough money for a playground in Attawapiskat. You see, and for those of you who know Attawapiskat well in this territory, of course, you have to ship major things up by a barge. And the barge, Wesley was so frustrated, he was sending me notes on Facebook, saying the friggin' barge is getting delayed. And if it's delayed till September, I won't be able to get up there to build the playground. But anyway, I have a broke a miracle. 3rd week of August, right on his birthday, the barge is going up. So I'm getting Facebook pictures from Wesley about him and the community members building this playground together, and the kids, for the first time in that community, being able to go on a swing. Is a real marker of hope. But when Wesley got back, he gave me a phone call and he says, I have an important story to tell you. He said, as I was standing there on the river waiting for the barge to come in, there were 2 special people there, Andrew Kustachin and Jenny Nakagi. And I said, you must be here to welcome the playground. And of course they were. The whole community was there, and they were having a big birthday party for Wesley to thank him as well. But they said, you know, Wesley, there's something else. In our tradition, we have a memorial for our daughter. And we were, quite frankly, so concerned because the memorial that we had prepared for her was not ready on the day that the barge should have left. But by some miracle, the barge kept on being delayed and delayed and delayed until the very day the memorial was ready. So Shannon Kustachin came back in her spirit with the playground equipment that Wesley had worked so hard for to raise. Now Wesley has a group called northernstarfish.org. He's not done yet. He wants to raise money to work with other First Nations children. And like he said to the Assembly of First Nations Chiefs in July, this is not about charity. This is about justice. And he calls his group Northern Starfish. And being a West Coast girl myself, I actually know that we do have starfish in BC. But I have yet to see one here in Ontario. So I finally worked up the courage to ask Wesley, why do you call your group northernstarfish.org? And he said, well, it's very simple, actually. He said, when I started to tell adults that I was going to do something, he said, all these people kept on telling me that this is a big problem, I can't do anything about it. I'm just a kid. I should be in swimming lessons or doing other things at soccer practice. That there's other people who are working on this problem, and maybe I should just, I've already done a lot by camping out, that's enough, and I should just go on being a kid. And he said, it started to really get to me. I started to wonder if all that was true, if kids actually can't make a difference, if all I can do is be a kid, but I can't make the world a better place until somehow I reach 18 and then I'm able to do that. So he's telling his dad, and his dad told him a story about starfish, and some of you know it. See, there's a boy, he comes up on a beach, and all these starfish had washed up. Now, his instinct as a child, being the keeper of love and possibility and hope and justice and fairness, he picks one up and he throws the starfish back in the ocean so that it might live. And he finds his knees bending again and again to save one starfish after another, and then a man walks by, but it could well be a woman. Says, "What are you doing there?" And the little boy says, "Well, I'm picking up these starfish and I'm putting them back so that they can live in the ocean. That's where they come from." And the man says, "Why are you even bothering? Have you looked at this? Look how many there are. You can't do this all by yourself. There's no way that you're going to be able to do it. You should be off doing other things. Why don't you just leave this and let others deal with it?" And the little boy stood up, and he looked down the beach, and there sure were a lot of starfish. And it probably was true that he was too small to be able to save them all. And maybe he should give up after all. Maybe the man was wiser, and that's the thing that you do, is you just give up when other people need you. But somehow that didn't sound right. It didn't seem okay not to help when you could. And so he, without any kind of thought, he found his knees bending, and he picks up a starfish and he throws it into the ocean, and he turns to the man and he says, "There, I just saved that one." On February 25th, 2013, for the first time ever in the history of this country, the Canadian government and ourselves will be in front of the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal. We will both be giving testimony under oath about the inequalities that First Nations children experience. The tribunal will hear our arguments over 14 weeks of testimony. And at the end, I feel confident that it's going to find that the government of Canada is racially discriminating against First Nations children, and it has the power to make an order for it to stop. But there is even a greater power, and that is with each one of you. It's for each one of you to join those children in sending letters to the Prime Minister to say, now is the generation of hope. We cannot waste another moment. That we will, in whatever peaceful and respectful ways, find ourselves with our knees bent, picking up the hand of a child and walking with them towards the principles of justice and fairness, and we will not stop until finally this country, whose name is Canada, a First Nations word that means village, can truly stand tall and proud in this world. Join us on February 14th, 2013, just days before the tribunal begins. Because if Prime Minister Harper thought he had a lot of Valentine's Day cards last year, watch out. Thank you very much. There's one over there. All right, so I think, Kendall, since you're younger, you get to do the roving mic thing, and I've got a louder voice. Yeah, over to the other. It reminds me, for those of you from my generation, you remember Phil Donahue. This is kind of our thing, right? Yeah, he was great.
I was in grade 5 when the school was contaminated, and I'm just happy that they're actually building the school.
Yeah.
It'll be built in 2013. Well, it's starting to be built now. My niece, she's going to be 4, walking in the hallways of the school.
Wow.
So,
And what is the school going to be called? Do you know?
Shannon's Memorial Elementary School.
Yeah. Hey. You know what? And that's a great sign that kids can change the world, because it was with the strength of all those children, their community members, leaders, and all the non-Aboriginal kids that that school got built. And I think all of us need to keep pushing, don't we? Until A, it's built, and B, that there's proper levels of education funding for those kids, because Charlie Angus wrote this song called Diamonds in the Snow for Shannon Kustachin. And he wasn't talking about the diamonds in De Beers diamond mine. He was talking about the diamonds that are the lived experience of the children and young people like you that work so hard for that school. So hands up to you, because you guys have inspired thousands and thousands of children and young people all over the world to sign up.
What kind of support have you been getting from the First Nation leadership across the country, and is it enough?
Right. It's never enough. We could always use more support, but we have been very blessed with the support. I mean, it was kind of crazy, because when we filed this thing in 2007, Canada has used a lot of divide and rule strategies with us as First Nations over the years. But I think because this was about children, and because what we were saying is that each community is in the best position to make decisions about its own kids, we just want to give them the resources to be able to do that, that we had unanimous support from the Assembly of First Nations Chiefs, and nobody has broken away from that in the 5 years. If anything, the strength is becoming stronger. And I give a lot of credit too to the grassroots community members who are going to their leadership and saying, this is the issue that we want to stand up for. And that has been most welcome. What people can do to help us now is within 30 days of filing that complaint, we were cut 100%. So you heard the cuts of the regional organizations. We were one of the first to get cut, but we survived. And I need to say, one of the major reasons we survived is because children are our biggest fundraisers. We never ask children for a dime, but children are the ones that own the Caring Society. And I like it that way, because that means they can fire us if we ever start doing things that are stupid. So you can make a donation, but more importantly, send these letters, get children in your communities involved. On these websites, you're going to hear from Shannon herself, right? A lot of the other young people from Attawapiskat are speaking directly to other kids, and you're going to see examples of what the non-Aboriginal kids are doing, because kids and young people inspiring kids and young people really is the best way to go. Kendall's a living example of that.
Could Dr. Blackstock please tell us about your relationship with the federal government and how they've gotten to get to know you?
Oh! Yeah. You know, I'm a little naive. I'm a girl who grew up in the bush in northern BC, and I believe that in a democracy and a place where freedom is supposed to underscore everything we stood for, that when you spoke out about something that mattered, that you would be safe from the government. But in 2009, in December, this was 2 years after we filed the human rights complaint, I had heard rumors before that governments were saying to other nonprofits, you know, it's not very good to get too close to that Cindy Blackstock. Bad things might happen. We might not approve your funding grant. They're saying to First Nations, if you have her at the table and you're talking about child welfare funding, we're not going to show up. But you have to let some of this stuff slide, because the focus has to be on the children. But I went to a meeting with the Chiefs of Ontario in 2009 in Indian Affairs headquarters. I was invited there. Some of you know the word in our parlance, I'm a technician. I'm not a leader. I just provide technical advice. And it's not unusual for the chiefs to take people like me along with them. So I go up and I do all the screening of the procedures at INAC. They have such a welcoming environment there, right? got to produce all your ID, you got to sign in, they give you a V sticker so that you stand out in a crowd, and then they swipe you through all these security gates. Well, I did all of that. And then I get up to the Indian Affairs office, and there's clear that there's some kind of problem. Because even though there's a vacant boardroom, we can see through the clear glass that must seat 30, 40 people, 50 people maybe. They're saying there's too many people here. And I saw an Indian Affairs official finally leaning against the door, and he was asking the people who they were as they were walking in, and I was last. And he said, who are you? And I said, well, I'm Cindy Blackstock. We'll talk to you at another time. I said, pardon me? He said, we'll talk to you another time. We know you have concerns about the tribunal and First Nations child welfare. We'll talk to you about this at another time. And I said, well, I'm not here to talk about any of those things. And Grand Chief Randall Phillips, some of you know him, stepped up and said, yeah, she's just here as technical advice. And the Indian Affairs official said, do you want to meet with us or not, Grand Chief? So the Grand Chief said, are you saying that if she's in the room, you're not willing to meet with us? And he said, that's exactly what I'm saying. So I volunteered to step outside of the meeting. I sit on a couch. I look across the coffee table, and there is a security guard. There must be about 225 pounds guarding me. So I wondered, what is it about me that's so threatening? I'm size 6. I don't have a parking ticket. I don't have a criminal record. I've never done anything violent. The most difficult thing I do is send Valentines to the Prime Minister. So what is it about someone like me? Well, I filed a privacy request, and to make a long story short, it's been very, very clear that I've been very closely watched by the Government of Canada, not only in my public life, but in my personal life. In fact, there are documents in those things that say, they're email documents between Aboriginal Affairs officials, and one of them says something along the lines of, we applied to monitor her Facebook page for a period of about 6 months, but we gave up because the Department of Justice was also monitoring. And given that they care so much about the efficient use of our tax dollars, they could just share the information. And when it came to why, there was a paragraph in there that said, the reason that we're doing this is to find other motives for the child welfare case to get it thrown out on frivolous and vexatious grounds. So, what I did with all of that, I don't believe that when you're getting hit with that kind of ugly behavior, the best thing to throw back on it is light. I have not released all those documents because I have the names of all those public officials. And unlike them, I do not want to embarrass them or their families. So I've not released the documents, but I have given them to the Privacy Commissioner to investigate. Because I do not think that any member of our society should ever have their personal life spied on because they have a view about an issue that's important to all Canadians. And so I'm going to stand up for that, and I've said to my friends, I don't know what I'm more embarrassed about, having them spy on me for this period of time, or having them spy on me for this period of time, and my life is so boring they haven't come up with one scandal that they can use against me. So that's what's happening. But I think we all need to take watch of that. You know, these are the things that we accuse other countries of doing, but it's clearly happening here. But it's not going to keep me silent because the kids are too important.
What if the government should win? Like, you sound like you really know your stuff. And I wouldn't want to be against you, but the government, they're pretty cagey people. So, like, if this doesn't work, what happens then?
What I've always said is that I want this generation of children and young people to know that we loved them enough to fight for them. I want them to know that we were prepared to go to the wall and we were prepared to do everything we could to stop it. And I absolutely do feel they're going to lose because they have to win on all battles. They have to win the public relations. They have to win in the courts. They don't have the evidence in the courts. And I think any caring Canadian who's looked at this so far has found against the Government of Canada, including the Auditor General of Canada, the Standing Committee on Public Accounts, and their own documents. So it's going to be an uphill battle for them, but in the end of the day, the real decision is not in the hands of the courts, it's in the hands of every single Canadian. Every citizen of this country, every First Nation citizen, every person who decides to do something helps ensure that not only the First Nations children win, but I've always said, when First Nations children win this case, so do Canadians. Because it makes this a better country. If Canada wins, we all as people have lost something very important about something we think is of value. So I plan on doing everything in my power to make sure that the kids win, and I hope that you'll do it too. And you guys should be writing down this website, because that's where you're going to find those Shannon's Dream and Jordan's Principle and I Am a Witness on how you can help. And one of the things that's really important for you to know is everything we do at the Caring Society in terms of engagement of the public is designed to be completely free. So you don't even need a stamp to mail a letter to your member of parliament or to the Prime Minister. So it's something that every child, every youth, every adult can do at no expense to themselves. Because we believe that being a Canadian citizen, being a citizen, a First Nation citizen, being a citizen of humanity, it takes a good heart, a mind, and action, but it doesn't take money. Well, Kendall, I think we're done. I don't see anybody else. So what I plan to do, by the way, is I now know how to get here. And I don't know if you looked, but there are counters on each one of those supporter things. And I expect every single last one of you to sign up, not only yourself, but at least 4 or 5 of your friends and families. Because we really, truly, this is our moment to make a difference. We cannot let our First Nations children down, and we cannot let the non-Aboriginal children down. We've got to set an example of what it is to be a good human being for the next generation. This is our chance to do it.
With that, I just have a few gifts that I'd like to present.
Do I get the baby? No! I have to say that she's the most beautiful girl in the whole place in the front row.
So I'd like to call Virginia McKenzie, a local artist from Bear Island, to come up and present Cindy with a gift.
A member of Temagami First Nations. On behalf of our chiefs, our council, and our people, Cindy, I'd like to say Chinigwich for taking the time out of your busy life to come and share what you've created and bring back so much light into the universe and so much love. And I truly believe in what you say is that it's the heart of a child that is going to take charge of the world to make the world a place that is free of greed, free of anger, free of violence. It's that heart of the child that is going to change humanity and bring them back to being kind human beings. And sometimes they need a spark and a fire just to, that little spark to light that fire. And you're definitely that spark that lights that fire and bringing back to what really matters. Because as humankind is that you make us mindful that the fact is one of the most important things in this world is our children. And at this time in this history is where we are as humankind is that we're at that turning point, and I believe that it's time for us all to change and time for us to look beyond our own egos, beyond our own prides, but to look at what we created, and that's our children. They need to be nourished and filled with light and love and beauty. And with this, this is a piece of art that I've done, and what it is called is a spirit flower. There's 7 flowers here that represent the 7 grandfather teachings. And each one of the little leaves that come up is a teaching, is something that we learn. And through this life, maybe we learn that there's things that, mistakes we made, You know, there's things that, you know, we've done good, maybe some that we haven't done so good. But as humankind, if we were perfect, we wouldn't be here. But as we've achieved to be that beautiful flower, that spirit flower on top, is then truly we work towards the things that our grandmothers and grandfathers want us to be. And with this is that I wish you a good journey, and I ask that the grandmothers and the grandfathers in the spirit world travel with you and protect you. I ask that the sun dancers that have danced and that went on, I ask that they dance around you during that day of court, and that the hearts of that jury and the hearts of those people be open and that they be allowed to see. Be rich.
There we are. Isn't it just beautiful? Thank you so very much. Thank you. Oh, hey, I'm coming back for sure next time.
So I'd like to call up Councillor Greg McKenzie to share and explain a little bit of project.
Put this right here so we
project
can all
he's
look and
been
enjoy it.
working on for children as well.
Basically, this is a project is for us to share a little piece of Temagami and to share it with people. And it started. This project started back, I believe, around 1993 when they were Goulart was going into Wayne Lake. Cut down that number they were saying it was the old growth forest. And the pro-forestry people were saying that, you know, there was an environmental movement from southern Ontario was coming up and they were protesting cutting down the old growth forest. And one of the arguments were saying, well, people I were hearing at the time was saying that these people from southern Ontario have no interest up here. Why are they coming up here? So that started my thought process of saying, well, this is the land of Temagami. Maybe I could give them an interest up here and save a little bit of the old growth forest at the same time. And that process started was developed this project, and it is in partnership with the Temagami Community Foundation. So by purchasing the tree, and it's basically what it says, this certifies that City Blackstock is the registered trustee of the pine tree that is identified by the Temagami Nation tag, inscribed with the same number on the certificate. And the Temagami Nation recognizes and honors the trustee's commitment to protecting the tree for the future generations. As such, a certificate is transferable and remains, as long as the tree remains standing in its original place as determined by creation. And it's signed by the chief of the Temagami First Nation. And in this case, the Temagami Nation will make Temagami First Nation will make a donation to the community foundations. And that in the Temagami Community Foundation, there is a Laura McKenzie Learning Center Fund, which is a fund that is set up to help the Temagami First Nation or Bear Island School. And hopefully we can, the intent is to fill that up so that we have enough that, you know, the school can benefit from it. And so people, you know, I sell these and hopefully I'm going to sell them and they sell at $100 each day. And so part of the process then is you buy a tag and then you get a piece of Temagami, which is a piece of the Temagami Nation heart.
Thank you. Check on my tree. That is such a great thing. Thank you very much.
Okay, so I just wanted to say a couple of thank yous. First of all, thank you, Cindy. Thank you for your determination and your commitment to our children.
Thank you.
You are fighting the fight that's worth fighting. And I'd like to say thank you to Kendall White for sharing
Yes.
her
Come on
her
out.
story. and actually, Kendall, thank you for being you. I really enjoy hearing from you every time I hear you speak, so thank you for being here tonight. I'd also like to thank the Temagami First Nation Chief and Council for hosting this event. They've supported it wholeheartedly, and I was really grateful for that. But you know, there was a whole team of people that kind of coordinated this evening, and so I really appreciate drivers and people putting notices and things like that. But we recently hired a communications officer, and I think in our first week of work, here's a project. Can you handle this? And so I really appreciate the work that she has done, and I really would like you to help me thank her with a big applause. That's Daisy Fannin. Thank you so much. But anyways, you are more than welcome to join us in we're having a little reception in the cafeteria. It's just out here to your right, and Cindy will be available if you'd like to speak to her on an individual basis, and you can have some snacks. So thank you all for coming.
Well, I now know what to get this very difficult to buy person for Christmas.